Hi, this is Randall Schwartz, host of Floss Weekly. This week, Simon Phipps joins me. We're going to be talking about ProcessMaker, a way to track your business processes thoroughly and reliably. You're not going to want to miss this, so stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Floss Weekly is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Floss Weekly with Randall Schwartz and Simon Phipps, episode 470, recorded February 7th, 2018, ProcessMaker. This episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. Home plays a big role in your life. That's why Quicken Loans created Rocket Mortgage. It lets you apply simply and understand the entire mortgage process fully so you can be confident that you're getting the right mortgage for you. Get started at rocketmortgage.com/floss. It's time for Floss Weekly, the show about free, libre, open source software. I am your host, Randall Schwartz, Merlin at Stonehenge.com, bringing you each week the movers, the shakers, the big projects, little projects you may be using every day and totally unaware of it, projects you might want to download and play with right after this show. Joining me once again is my lovely and talented co-host, Simon Phipps. Welcome back to the show.
It's still good to be back, Randall. I seem to have done every show for the last month, but it's still feeling a good thing to do. Well, I even did an extra one with Leo at the weekend at midnight in Brussels on the 20th birthday of open source. See my sticker? This is my 20th birthday of open source sticker here. So we had a big shindig in Brussels at FOSDEM, and then I got to tell Leo all about it after I got back from the party.
Wow, that's some stamina there. I guess you needed some caffeine for that. But so you're in your Southampton location?
I am indeed in the international headquarters of Meshed Insights, and you can see that I have still the beautiful refurbished surroundings with the exotic decor.
And I got back very late Sunday for my 15-day cruise, and thank you, Simon, for hosting one of the two shows during the time I was gone. You guys did a great job, but I'm glad that we can keep the show moving even when I have to be out on very, very skinny Wi-Fi. I actually was in the chat room for both of the shows, but I had to turn off the video. I could only watch I could only listen to the audio, and even then it would still cut out half the time because about 1.5 megabit. Everybody else seemed to be using the same bandwidth, which really screws up. It's kind of crazy that way. But I'm good to be back. Good to be back in the big chair. I'm in Beaverton in my home for this week. I'll actually be down in Santa Monica next week with a lot better bandwidth. Here I'm stuck on sort of mediocre Wi-Fi, so there'll probably be a few drops every once in a while, but that's okay. We'll still go ahead and get the show done. So this week we have an interesting project, and there's a lot going on with it. So it's going to be fun trying to figure out what this thing is all about. The project is called ProcessMaker, and it is a way of managing workflows. So in every business, there's sequences of things to go through, and like an approval step or a disapproval step or whatever. And so ProcessMaker has a graphical interface, at least the demo showed this way, where you kind of just draw the process. Like you start with a request that comes in from here, you need to get an approval from here, so that's to another track, and that track triggers somebody else looking at the currently inflow thing. We've actually used must have been about 10 years ago, we used something similar to this when I was working for the University at Buffalo. We were actually integrating with a workflow system that the university had purchased in corporate without talking to any of the IT guys about how hard it would be to integrate everything. Thank God for Perl. we integrated the heck out of that thing. So that was pretty crazy. So Simon, what do you know about this so far?
I know absolutely nothing apart from what I've read in my briefing notes. I'm familiar a little bit with Alfresco and Bonita, but not with ProcessMaker. And so I shall be interested to find out what makes it open source. Generally in this sector, people are pretty crappy at being open source. There's a lot of AGPL software. There's a lot of open core. There's a lot of open source in name only. So I shall be interested to dig into the community and find out what makes this qualify as open source apart from the license. And I shall be interested to see how it compares with its open source competitors, of which there are quite a few.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be interesting. Brian Reel is actually going to be joining us in a few minutes, but before that, I have a very important message. Because this episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. The mortgage experience wasn't keeping up with the times. It was dated, and it needed a client-focused technological revolution. That's why Quicken Loans created Rocket Mortgage. Rocket Mortgage gives you the confidence you need when it comes to buying a home or refinancing your existing home loan. It's simple, allowing you to fully understand all the details and be confident you're getting the right mortgage for you. It's convenient. Their trusted partners allow you to share your financial information with Rocket Mortgage at the touch of a button. It's powerful. Whether you're looking to buy your first home or your 10th, Rocket Mortgage is able to perform thousands of calculations in seconds. Based on your income, assets, and credit, Rocket Mortgage can analyze all the home loan options for which you qualify and find the one that's just right for you. Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. Apply simply, understand fully, mortgage confidently. To get started, go to rocketmortgage.com/floss. That's rocketmortgage.com/FLOSS. Equal housing lender, licensed in all 50 states, NMLSconsumeraccess.org number 3030. And we thank Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans for their support of Floss Weekly. Now let's go ahead and bring on our guest, Brian Reel. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here.
And where are you speaking to us from?
Today I'm in San Francisco. Usually in Durham, North Carolina, but today in San Francisco.
Cool. So you're 3 hours into the past, actually, right? Yeah, it's future over there. It's past here, right? Very good. So I gave sort of what I think this is about. And again, it's like 4 sentences to describe something that takes 400 sentences to describe. But why don't you give us a 30,000-foot view? When I'm reaching for ProcessMaker, what problem am I trying to solve?
So your description was actually really good. The sort of problem that ProcessMaker is solving is this combined technical and business problem. So it uses a language, it uses a visual way to design a process, and the process is going to have some sort of element of an approval and forms. So we'll connect to systems, but generally also connect to people who are going to do some sort of validation step or approval step. So the classic examples would be things like purchase requests that may also then connect to an ERP, or a credit request that may also then later connect to a core banking system. Or what we're finding more and more of are data validation requests. So things like master data management type processes where people want to make a change to some sort of business data set, but don't want to do it directly in their ERP because they may not have the flexibility to do that. So it generally handles that workflow of approvals in between systems and between people, is how I describe it.
And these have been around for ages, actually, because like I said, the University at Buffalo had purchased one, and I had to integrate it with a bunch of Perl code to tie into the processes we already had. So has there been a lot of open source activity in this area?
There has been, and there's also been a lot of standards work. So flow charting, which is really the origins of business process management and workflow, and it's gone through a number of different name changes. So whether it's workflow or business process management or digital transformation suites, which seems to be the kind of word that people are using today to describe these suites, they've been around for a while. I mean, they've been around for a long time. And in terms of open source, there are a number of other open source projects. Each one has a pretty different feel. This is not a totally sort of commoditized space like, say, CRM. So you don't get a very generally similar feel out of each of the different open source projects.
Okay, and so how did ProcessMaker come about? Are you the original project leader?
So I am the founder and the original sort of designer behind ProcessMaker. We started as a company doing something else, and then we had a few projects where we were asked to develop systems. The initial system we started developing was for a government in Latin America, and it was described to us as a transparency system to sort of eliminate corruption, which was kind of interesting. So that was our original approach to what later became or what evolved into the ProcessMaker open source project. It was actually we were designing a system to manage paperwork for a government agency to increase transparency and reduce corruption.
Okay, now as I was researching this, I see that there's actually two sort of main camps about this. So there's the classic open source community edition that I can download and use today. And then there also seems to be something that you're moving more towards, which is using it as an API, as essentially software as a service. Can you contrast those two and tell us which direction you're actually moving and why?
Yeah, so we've ProcessMaker as an open source project actually has just celebrated 10 years. So the project's been around for 10 years. It's got pretty wide adoption. It's being used in some verticals more than others, in some geographies more than others. But one of the things that we as a company began doing around the project a couple of years ago was much more embedded work. So CRM systems, ERP systems that were looking to improve workflow, we noticed they were interested in embedding ProcessMaker. And as we started doing that work, we also realized that they were not using any of our interfaces. They were just using the engine, the core engine, as a routing engine. And so we've recently started a new project. So ProcessMaker as a workflow suite for mid-market kind of companies that are automating forms and approvals is still our sort of core focus, but we've also started a new project called ProcessMaker IO. ProcessMaker IO is an API microservice. The API as a microservice is currently not something that's open source, but what we've done is created a couple projects around it. So the designer for that for ProcessMaker IO is open source, and in fact, it's Apache licensed. It's an Apache licensed designer because it's meant to be embedded in somebody else's software. It's meant to drive the API or drive other APIs as well.
Okay, but at that point, if I've built my application around your API, I now have the problem of vendor lock-in, don't I?
Well, we don't think so because it becomes really easy to replace that API. So our argument is, hey, you've got a very clear and distinct sort of place where you're getting a service. We're calling it a token transition. So we will manage token transitions. But the minute you want to gut that and change out the API because it's a pure microservice, it should be truly easy to replace. And so we actually think it's less lock-in than a typical open source project where you might have to get more involved in the core to actually sort of take over ownership of whatever you're building. So here, if you want something else to route your tokens and it's speaking a common language, it speaks BPMN 2.0. So you would just simply say, okay, I don't want to now use this service. I'll just plug in another service.
Oh, okay. So because some of this is standardized, we don't have that problem of vendor lock-in then, right?
Yeah, that's what we're seeing because it's again, it's a pure microservice. The part you're going to put in your software. So this is designed for ISVs, for software vendors, and it's like the designer is a much simpler designer. So interestingly, even though we believe the designer was sort of made to be a really easy way to build a business process, BPMN designers can be a little bit complex. This is a very simple designer. That would get deeply embedded. It's pure JavaScript, pure Vue.js, in fact. That then can be molded, skinned however an ISV would want. And then the day you say, hey, I don't want to connect to this API, you just swap out the API.
You have a number of really beautiful demos, and we wanted to pull up just the first one just so there's a little more visual instead of us just talking about these really cool things. But again, most of our audience is audio only, so if you could describe what we're looking at here. Wait for John to push the button here. There we go, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is the design experience. So this is a standard business process management designer using BPMN 2.0. So it's all click and drag, and I can sort of start laying out the tasks, or what in BPMN they call activities, for a business process. And this has the sort of typical pattern, which would be create something. So there's a form interface, create purchase order. Then it gets sent to somebody who either approves or rejects the purchase order. And then based on that, it may start going into a parallel bifurcation. And at that point, we're sending it to a supplier, and we're also generating an order in the ERP, which would be a connector to an ERP.
So what we're looking at. what we're looking at here
Yeah.
is 3 horizontal rows. That represents the 3 areas of responsibility. So it'd be like different agents.
Yeah, so the swim lanes are the actors or the agents.
Yeah.
And then when you separate that off into an actual separate pool, then you're talking about an entity that's actually sort of an outside entity. So you have pools and swim lanes, which have, again, that's the kind of common part that's been around since flowcharting was started in the early 80s.
Yeah, and it really looks beautiful too. I mean, the nice drag and drop. What's that implemented with? Is that jQuery?
That's jQuery, and so it's designed to be all drag and drop.
And I saw a lot of PHP in the tarball. Is that the other primary language?
Yeah, that's one of the other things that's sort of unique about ProcessMaker. It's a PHP project. The other sort of open source BPM suites are all Java based. I think we're the only PHP one.
So this all looks very shiny. So I've been digging around looking for the source code, and I can find your tarball up on SourceForge. Where is the Git repository?
It's also under ProcessMaker. So if you look under ProcessMaker, you should be able to find it.
All right, because I've been digging around trying to find that, because normally that's a great way of understanding the community. So how big is your co-development community there?
So I'd say active and most active contributors are sort of contributing mostly on the periphery of, these would be language packs, they're plugins. There's a few thousand, I would say, that are active at any given time.
No, I'm still not seeing the Git repository. Maybe you can point me more towards it, because if I can dig into there, I can maybe ask you some more questions about your community.
Put ProcessMaker sketch. So for the new designer, it should come up under ProcessMaker. Let me see.
Okay, so I'm looking at your SourceForge page, which for your ProcessMaker open source, and I'm pretty sure John will edit this out.
It's more fun to have it authentic. More fun.
Yeah, if you here, I don't know if I can paste that in here. So okay, Colosa /ProcessMaker. So we used to be called Colosa. That's the ProcessMaker open source, and then if you look under ProcessMaker Sketch, so we actually changed the name. Yeah.
Okay, Randall's pasted it in.
And then ProcessMaker /Sketch, you'll see the new designer, the ProcessMaker IO designer.
Okay, I've got you now. So I noticed that. So is that link on your website anyway?
It's to the GitHub repository. The Sketch one is on ProcessMaker IO, and the GitHub on. I don't believe that's on the website, because we really have relied more on SourceForge traditionally. Right,
but it's tricky to do. It's tricky to co-develop with you on SourceForge if the repository is on GitHub. Honestly.
Yeah, no, I agree. Which is why the new project has been kind of moved completely over to GitHub.
All right. So there we go. So no pull requests on there. So we've got contributors. And you've got I can't see any contributors in 2017 on ProcessMaker then. I'm looking under Insights, and I'm looking for contributions to master, and there's been no contribution since 2015 as far as I can see.
Yeah, I mean, it's mostly our core team driving ProcessMaker on SourceForge for ProcessMaker open source, but ProcessMaker Sketch is fully on GitHub.
Right. Okay. So is this actually a community project, would you say, or would you say that your open source is more a lead generation than anything else?
No, I mean, I would say I don't think it's black and white. So it's a on the spectrum, is it the most open source or the least open source? I mean, it's certainly our licensing is again on the ProcessMaker open source BPM. It's AGPL, so it's not the most open source license, but on ProcessMaker Sketch, it's Apache 2.0. So,
right.
I'd say it's.
Yeah. AGPL is a fine open source license. I remember approving it myself. So it's that's not a problem. It seems, as far as I can see, that the code you're actually monetizing, your enterprise version, is that open source?
So it is the open source core. So we don't have any differences between the core that we use in ProcessMaker open source, and then what we do is add on some additional plugins. So there's no change in the core. Right.
So if I'm one of your customers and I decide that for whatever reason I want to scale back my subscription to your services, am I still able to keep on operating?
Yeah, completely.
So I can, all the source code that I've got installed, if I have your enterprise version, if I decide no longer to be your customer, I can keep on using it.
Yeah, you would lose things like you'd lose external plugins like reporting and some analytics and some management consoles, but there's no crippling of core features at all.
Right. But so those plugins aren't open source then?
Some plugins are open source, but we also have some plugins that we sell.
Right. And are there any developers who are using that core themselves to compete with you?
There are, yeah.
Right. And so they're using the same plugin architecture. I'm able to switch from one to the other.
So we call them both plugins, but what I mean by plugins, so we sell a group of enterprise plugins that are plugins that we monetize, that we've created. But the plugin architecture is open, so anybody could create a plugin, and anybody can create a plugin, and then they could create a package of plugins and monetize that package of plugins as well. So we do have we see a lot of plugins out there that either repeat or compete with our own plugin packs.
Right. So now looking at the source code you've got here. Do your internal developers work in the open? Do you have a public bug tracker, for example?
So it's not 100% public. We use Mantis for bug tracking, but we use Jira internally, and we're still they're sort of stitched together in not the ideal way. So the Mantis tracking is public, but what we're working on is not completely public.
Right. And the development that you're doing, is that development being done, do you have a repository inside your own company and then you copy that to SourceForge or copy that to GitHub, or are your developers making commits and changes on the public version that I can see?
So we are doing it internally and then copying it out again, because not in the new project, but in ProcessMaker, the existing project, yes. Right.
So do you feel that this is a typical approach to open source for the BPM sector, or do you feel that you are better or worse than your competitors at doing open source in BPM?
That's a good question. I think it's, I think because the most active user in the sort of community tends to be a business user. There's sort of more concern at a higher level, so more participation at sort of here's templates, or here are processes that we're developing that we want to share or reutilize. So in that sense, I think it's a little more common in BPM because there's sort of not as much community development going on as in the core. So yeah, I think it's probably more common in BPM than in other types of projects.
So I wanted to get a little bit more into the technology of this. So what we're basically looking at when we're using this system. Oh, and that demo that we saw, would that be fully supported by the Community Edition?
Yeah, that's the designer.
Okay, so I could
elements of the designer.
I could download this and follow. The install instructions are quite lengthy, but I could probably get through all those. I see you're basing stuff around MySQL, PHP, Apache. Is it 2.2 or 2.4? I can't remember when I saw that, but one of those anyway. And so if I set this up and then pointed my browser at it, I would see something like that really cool process interface, right?
Yeah, it's a LAMP stack, and so when you and we also distribute a sort of Windows installer. Most of the downloads, most of the trials of the open source, in fact, are on Windows. Interestingly, although most people run it in Linux at scale. And so, yeah, you get the full. I mean, and the open source has the full designer, the full runtime engine, full interfaces, sort of everything of that nature.
And are there like web callbacks or something as processes get moved forward that I can integrate? Even if I'm not using one of your existing plugins, I can still write my own plugins to integrate with stuff that I have around me? Yeah,
so the API is fully exposed as well. There's a REST and a SOAP API. And so I'd say about 50% of the use cases that we actually get to see use the kind of pre-baked user interfaces that ship with the community project, but the others are doing something totally different. So they're using front ends that might be their own mobile front end. It might be a content management system, could be email clients, but it's calling the API, moving the token forward, and then producing kind of lists inside other front end systems. So the front end is what we see kind of undergoing the most change. Sort of over the years, people have tended to kind of migrate from content management systems to mobile, to other kinds of systems to manage the flow of their processes.
Oh, I think I missed that earlier. So let me emphasize the point here, and you can tell me if I'm wrong or right on this. So you just mentioned API in the Community Edition. Does that mean it's the same API that I would get on your ProcessMaker.io?
No. So ProcessMaker.io is a completely, so the Community Edition and the Enterprise Edition do have the same API, and the API is open. It's the same API in both editions. ProcessMaker.io is a different build, a different product. And that one has a different API. So that was kind of rethought more from a embeddable perspective of what a company that's building a software product, so a non-BPM software product, might want out of workflow and how they might call it. Right.
Okay, I get that. That makes sense. So how does one normally then? I mean, I saw that one of the demos it integrated with the Google Mail. So when a mail form came in, it would automatically start the process, and you could, I think it was for NDA approval or something like that. How is that integration done? I presume on the Community Edition, I have to write some sort of attachment somehow that gets triggered based on state changes. How does that work from the hosted version, from the your new .io version?
So from the .io version, it's interesting because if you start a process, let's say you start it from a form or you start it from an action in some other system, that action is completely outside of ProcessMaker, so we don't know what's happening, but then you're calling a start event. So you're calling a listener. The listener is then essentially kicking off the process and creating a pending case for somebody else. So it's basically start case or route case in the API, and then the next user would be fetching an inbox or would be getting a push notification. So we're adding push notifications actually in the next release. So it gets a push notification and then knows to go and check an inbox if they're building an inbox. So you'd have to build an inbox for that, and then would see the next case.
And I also liked your demo that had Slack integration, because ZipRecruiter is crazy about Slack. So we've got like about 50 little bots that are all doing really bizarre things. And so I thought, wow, this would be one more thing it could do. So that really seems good. So are there integrations for most common business applications?
So we have two integration frameworks. One in the BPM product, where we have connectors for things like signature products. So DocuSign, Adobe Sign, ERP products, so SAP, email clients, and then in the ProcessMaker IO as well, we're starting to build a repository of connectors, and you can also build your own connectors. So we will be releasing another project where you can create your own connectors, and those connectors can be built in either Lua or PHP.
Lua is an interesting choice. Why did you choose Lua?
Basically, because of the sandbox sort of capabilities of Lua, it seemed like a good choice, and it was very simple and similar to PHP.
Yeah, we had Lua on, I think that must have been like 6 or 7 years ago on this show, so that was pretty fun. That it's a Portuguese word for moon, which I thought was pretty cool too. Right. So Lua, yeah, that's pretty cool. I think Simon's got a couple of questions he wants to ask you, and I'm also running out for a second. So Simon, hopefully you didn't get sabotaged there.
Yeah, no, I'm sitting here digging around on GitHub. So I have to say, Brian, I've looked at both your new and your old GitHub, and I don't see any contributions on either of them. Are you sure that you're moving all your development to GitHub?
Yeah. So Sketch is new, right? And the other pieces that we're releasing for ProcessMaker IO, it's all pretty new. I mean, it's only been out there in the last. Well, we really started it about 1.5 years ago, but it's only been out there, less than a year. So it is all moving to GitHub, but slowly.
Right. Well, because I'm looking at the commits on Sketch, and there was one. The last commit on Sketch was on November the 19th. There was one commit, and 4 commits on November 12th, and 2 commits on October 22nd, and that's the whole lot.
Yeah, I mean, admittedly, it's a slow process, but we will be all on GitHub in the coming months.
Right.
All of the development. I mean.
So I'm interested in why you picked AGPL for your community edition.
So we did that 4 years ago, right when it came out. So it was, I think at that point in time, we saw it as things were starting to move to hosted business models, and so it seemed to offer us as an enterprise around the open source more protection around a hosted business model, and those that would kind of host it and then make changes and not want to contribute back. So, I think it was at the time it wasn't very popular, but if I'm not mistaken, now it's much more popular.
Right. I noticed that the activity project is under the Apache license. It looks like AGPL might be more common. Do you think there is actually any scope for business process management companies to do collaborative open source in open communities? Or do you think that the only way of doing this is by having single company projects?
I think the single company project has become the norm. And I think it's because of the heavy business user focus, this idea of low code. I think there are moves to this sort of pure API style, where it then becomes something that's much more designed to be embeddable. But when you're building it, BPM by nature is supposed to be low code. It's supposed to be for a business analyst. So the contributors and the contributions tend not to be that focused on the core. So there tends not to be much activity. So there tends to be more incentive to kind of bring it in and not do that as much in the open. So I think that is, probably what's pretty true across the board.
Right. So just as a general idea, how is BPM code structured? There's obviously a need for a very simple graphic process designer. And then what happens? Does that then get compiled into a program, or what's the general usage flow?
Yeah. So the idea of the designer. So today, a designer would use. So if you look at our new project, you could take any BPMN 2.0 file, and that is really just an XML file structure, is a defined file structure. That can then be read by our engine, but that doesn't say anything about data, which is kind of why the BPM industry, I think, has had some struggles around this idea that there's a common language, because the common language doesn't say anything about the most interesting part, which tends to be data. Then you've got the whole user experience. So the only thing you can define in a common set is the map, and the map is pretty limited in what it conveys. So the map, in our case, we will wrap that in another file. We call it in our BPM product, we call it a PMX file. And that has all the richness of other things, like, are there plugins, are there data tables that are associated that are needed to run? Is there anything else that's needed to run this process? And then that's imported, read by the engine, and then run run by the engine.
Right. So I mean, I'm looking on Wikipedia at the list of BPMN engines, and there's a lot of them out there. There's a lot of Java up there, I see. Do you think that there is the number of people trying to attack this problem shows that it's impossible to do in a commoditized way?
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of activity for a market which, in some senses, is a questionable market. I mean, it's not like CRM or ERP where everybody knows exactly what it means, and the sort of normal approach to solving a BPM problem is building something, custom code. So this idea of using an engine, a pre-built engine, it can have a lot of complexity with it. I think that's the industry, in fact, has tried to shed its own name many times. I mean, you won't go to a BPM conference where there's not at least one sort of seminar about people saying why it should no longer be called BPM. And that's because it's kind of gotten a bad rap over the last 30 years, because many think it hasn't delivered the sorts of results it should have delivered. Now, that's bifurcated, I think, into tools that have more of a feel just around connectors. Then you've got the whole sort of industry around forms. So it is complex, and I don't think anybody's completely gotten it right, which is why everybody keeps trying. I mean, I see a new BPM project or BPM product, at least a few times a year.
So I had some questions that occurred while I wasn't talking. That's a good time to have questions, right? When I'm not actually talking, because then I can actually ask the question myself. So is there some kind of, there's a lot of moving parts in this thing. Once you get all these flows starting to click through and move stuff around, how difficult is it to take things that are already in flight and actually change the workflow out from under that? Does that work? Can you patch these things while you're running live?
You can make changes. We generally don't recommend it, because you might think you can make a change, and then, of course, you don't really know the repercussions of that change. If it's a form field addition, you can do that pretty safely in flight. If you were to try and change a route or change a task without versioning the process and letting all of the running cases finish on the existing process, that's when you would have problems, because you don't know if there's a route that loops back to a task which now no longer may exist. So we generally say, hey, you should not edit a process while it's running unless it's really just an addition of a field.
And do you have some kind of dashboard where I can kind of look at the process map or the flow and see how many things are in all the different states?
Yeah. So the reporting tool. So we offer a plugin. So in this case, it's an enterprise plugin. It's a one that we sell, which is reporting, but only a lot of customers will use their own reporting tools. So they, of course, can look directly at the MySQL tables, pull out what they want, and then produce the sort of dashboards you would expect, which is who's got a case, how long have they had it, which cases are underperforming or outside of a service level agreement. So if I've set up that such and such a task needs to happen in 2 days, and then I want to see all the tasks that are not being completed in 2 days, then I could reroute them automatically or reroute them manually. So the dashboards, that's that sort of management reason for kind of wanting to implement BPM is usually around visibility and dashboards.
And how fine-grained is the authentication and authorization? Can I have only a certain class of people who can build workflows, access only a certain kind of controls?
Yeah, so it's role-based permissioning. So the designer it would not be available to everybody in the enterprise. So for enterprises we see that are running tens of thousands of users, they're going to have 10, 5, 10 designers. So there aren't that many people that would design processes. We've seen some that are doing, say, groups of 10, 20, 30 designers, but that's for tens of thousands of users.
So you're saying that the designer has access to every control always?
Yeah, the beautiful process map that you're seeing, that's not something that an end user ever sees. They're just seeing that they get a form, it's pushed to them, and they'll usually think of it as, I have to do a validation. Maybe it's an email with a button on the bottom that says approve or reject, or maybe it's a link to a form, and that's all. They're just thinking it's, I'm filling out forms, I'm routing information, and I'm validating information.
Well, I know like at ZipRecruiter, one of the things they're doing is making the teams a little bit more autonomous. So if I were to want, say, a designer to access only the actions of a particular team, there's no way I can get that to happen then, right?
Right now, currently in ProcessMaker, that either you have access to the designer or you don't have access to the designer. So if you have multiple teams, we don't have a way to separate out the team access to the designer. We've had that request a couple times, but it's because there's so few designers. Usually they're already coordinating with each other, so that permissioning isn't such an important feature.
Okay, and how about for the rest of the workflow is only triggering external APIs though, so we're not actually talking about any kind of user-based authentication and authorization in the workflow system, right?
So most companies are going to connect to their Active Directory, and they're going to pull in all their users, and they're going to use that for authentication and for determining who reports to whom, which becomes important in terms of routing work, because a lot of the work will get routed based on reporting structures. So it's really all based off of it's usually an LDAP to an Active Directory, and that's how we're getting all the kind of employee data in.
And then there'd be people like me. I'm a contractor for ZipRecruiter, and I'm not in the hierarchy of the LDAP. I'm just a miscellaneous entry. So maybe I just would never get any work to do. That'd be kind of nice.
Yeah, well, you might. So we do have concepts for that too. So there's the either non-authenticated external actors. So they might fill out what we call web entries, so forms which kick off workflows, or you could still be permissioned. So that kind of system you see where you have to fill out an initial form, get your user credentials. So there's a way to do that in ProcessMaker. It's kind of baked into the product, so I can just put a form up and say this is going to be for external users that want to create a username and a password, and then they're automatically put into a group with a very low level of permissions so that they can interact with the company. So that could be for contractors like you, Randall.
Okay, that'd be cool. I guess I could fit in there somewhere. I hope
so you still get some work.
Got to get paid somehow, so I have to do something productive at some point. So you've been managing this project now for 10 years. So what's been the most surprising thing as the project has been evolving?
So I think that it's the geographies that it's spread to. So seeing clients finding users in pretty much every part of the world is always fun. A really fun part about open source, I think, and sort of the wide distribution that it's gotten. And then the use cases, we've seen really, really interesting use cases, and I get to go and meet with a lot of users all the time, see how they're using it. I think the biggest change has been around connectivity. It's gotten so much easier to connect to third-party systems. The whole genre of sort of integration platforms that are out there now has made it a lot easier for us. And there's also a sort of integration platform concept built into ProcessMaker. So you have lots of connectors to lots of systems. So it's just gotten a lot easier, especially in the last sort of 5-6 years, to connect to external systems. And that's lent value to ProcessMaker. So, I mean, I always thought that, you keep thinking that the ERPs where we're constantly integrated with the ERPs, that they would sort of solve this problem, but inevitably it's difficult to solve because there's just a level of approvals that happens outside of the ERP in different industries.
So there's an internal MySQL database, which I presume is for state and also to manage the workflows and things like that, and also keep knowledge of the integrations. But is there any end data stored in there? And if so, how do I scale that if I want to have a lot of data?
So you can. We have a concept called ProcessMaker tables. So you can build your tables into ProcessMaker, but normally workflow and your BPM is a tool for transition. So there's usually another place of rest. So most companies that we're working with that are at a certain scale, or most users of the open source that we see that are companies of a certain size, they're pulling data in from their system, they're manipulating it, approving it, agreeing to change it, and then registering that change back in an external system. So it's usually not the system of rest. It's usually not the only system. So it doesn't. Most customers are not, or most users are not building all their data into ProcessMaker.
So I can drop some sort of PHP connector in to send data to my external database, then, right?
Yeah, you can use. So ideally, you'd be doing that through REST, but you could also do it directly to the database.
Well, with REST, I'd have to then build an interface on the other side that then talks to my database. So it's just removing the problem one level. But I see what you mean. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's good. So because I was worried, like, okay, is all my data in flow in there, and then we have to worry about authorization and authentication too. Again, it's like, well, data at rest needs to be encrypted or something if we're going to have anything like that. But I imagine you thought about all that, right?
Yeah. So I mean, in our hosted version, of course, we're encrypting it, and other customers or users, whatever they're doing on premise, we wouldn't necessarily know, but yeah, they're generally encrypting it as well.
Mm-hmm. So I'm actually quite interested in your comment a little while ago about how you'd expect the ERP to do all this. For you to be more than just a Visio with bells on, presumably you're integrating with ERPs and back-end systems all over the place.
Yeah, that's what we most do. So it's back-end systems. So we become very popular with banks in especially sort of outside of the U.S. And so in there it's integrations with core banking systems. And so the core banking systems, what we've seen is a lot of banks are using this for their credit approval workflow, because that's something they want to have be a little more agile. The core banking system was not conceived to do that. So there's a flow of information, but then it all eventually gets pushed to the core banking system.
Right. So is that a big part of your business, going and doing custom installations for large enterprises, or are you mostly focused around support subscriptions for an off-the-shelf product?
It's sort of half and half. So we and there are other partners that are selling services around ProcessMaker, so they'll do it in different geographies around the world. So it depends on if it's a geography that we can kind of be active in, where we speak the language, then we will engage in that kind of work. But we're also kind of selling our bells and whistles that we've added onto ProcessMaker.
Right. So do you aspire to being acquired by an IBM or an SAP or an Oracle to use as their ERP GUI?
No, I mean, we're pretty happy doing what we do. We've been doing it for 10 years now, and the project keeps growing, and we've got an exciting release coming up. So we're happy doing what we do. So we just aspire to grow each year.
Right. So to go back to that question about open source, do you think that open source is an important part of your business strategy?
Today, on the business strategy side, it's an important part. But I mean, we've also
and technical strategy.
Going forward, in terms of the new project, yes. In the past, I would say we've kind of been in transition from the sort of SourceForge model to the GitHub model on our existing on existing ProcessMaker. But yeah, I mean, it's an important part. Is it everything? I don't necessarily believe in sort of those kind of absolutes. So we're open source. We're also cloud. That's also an important part of our business strategy. So they all kind of play a role.
Right. And I saw you had a cloud product there. So is the cloud product also based on this AGPL code? I mean, that would be a good reason to pick AGPL, is if your future is in the cloud.
That's what we thought when we picked it. So when we picked it, and that was sort of, again, 4 or 5 years ago, we thought, hey, this is, we're going to be doing more in the cloud. And so this was somewhat of a protectionary measure. And yeah, that's an important part of our business today.
Do you think that protects you too much from contribution?
To be honest, I don't think it would matter if we change the license. Things are moving so fast that I just don't see that sort of license. When we picked it originally, we thought that, but had we chosen an Apache license, I don't think it would have made much of a difference. And that being because of what I was mentioning before, where it's because it's a product really focused on a business user. Those users, it's hard to get engagement from those users at a deeper level. And so if the core had been, if they felt, hey, we can have more ownership of the core, would there be more or less more participation? That's hard to say. Now, I think in the case of the new project, yes, because we believe it's focused on software vendors, and a software vendor is really going to want complete control on what they're putting into their code. So we've said, hey, take the designer, you have complete control over it. And then again, the API is delivered as a service, but a service where if we're not performing, great, you just swap it out. It's a very clean API, very clear how you would replace it with a competitive product or build your own.
Yeah, we get that a lot with open source projects, is that the typical user is not somebody who can typically contribute, or at least find a way to contribute other than, say, filing bug reports and wish lists and things like that. So it sounds like this is the classic ProcessMaker is quite in that camp. We're almost out of time, but I did want you to bring up one thing that you remember probably better than I do. How did we meet?
So we met at the All Things Open in Raleigh, and we just happened to be sitting at the same table. So it was great. I've been a long-time admirer, so of course I recognized you. You didn't recognize me, but I wasn't. That didn't stop me. And,
the webcams typically only go one direction, so I can't see my audience out there, which is pretty scary. I'm sure there's a few I wouldn't want to see right now. I'm not pointing at you. I'm not pointing at some other people. and so this was at All Things Open, the great conference. I'm definitely looking forward to going back there again next year. And it turned out that I was able to I was officially pressed, but I managed to scam my way into the speaker dinner, which was where we actually met. So it was a good coincidence to have one of my audience members actually sitting at the table. But that happens more frequently than I imagine now, because we've got quite a few numbers of thousands of downloads every week. So it's pretty cool. Like I said, we're almost out of time.
I just remember thinking, who's the sort of loudest guy over there on the other side of the table?
Yeah,
and then it
gets
came
pretty loud. It does. Any time an adult beverage is in my hand, that usually increases the volume up to 11 after a while. So yeah, I was definitely probably hitting 11 by then. Yeah. Well, that's part of my charm, I guess. All right. So we're almost out of time. Is there anything we didn't cover that you want to make sure our audience is aware of before we have to let you go?
No, I think we did a good job covering it. I mean, certainly would love to see more people downloading the software, and we are making an effort to get more of it up onto GitHub and do more out in the open. So Simon, you will see that in the near future.
Awesome. And I have two questions that are mandatory. If you've listened to the show for any length of time, I always ask everybody. So what's your favorite scripting language?
Now it's Lua.
Lua, great. And what is the text editor you spend all day in? Vim. Well, didn't get either of those, but that's okay. No Emacs, no Perl, but I got enough of those, so that's all good. So, hey, Brian, I really thank you for coming on the show and answering some somewhat difficult questions sometimes about your project. And I hope you all the success that you want out of this. And I look forward to seeing what the next release looks like, and we'll see how everything goes with there. So, Brian, thanks for coming on the show.
Great. Thanks to you, Randall. Thanks, Simon.
All right, that was Brian Reel talking to us about ProcessMaker. What did you think, Simon?
I think they've got some cool stuff there, and I'm really pleased to hear that they're moving towards using GitHub and doing development in the open. I can't help feel that open source is more about lead generation than it is about leveraging collaborative innovation. But that's pretty common in both BPM and ERP software. So I'd say that's pretty much what I was expecting to hear, honestly.
Yeah, it's still a little dragging along with old school, because we've seen open source be so much more successful these days. But again, it's the point I brought up a few minutes ago, which is that sometimes these projects aren't really being used by the kind of people that could help develop them. And so we end up with this sort of end user dichotomy. And it sounds like this was one of those that fell into that place. And there's probably quite a few domains where that's true still. But having it open source means other people can play around with it and fix it, or I can hire somebody to make it better for me. Whereas even if I'm not a programmer myself, I can at least hire a programmer to customize it, add new features, fix bugs, whatever. When it's open source, I can do that. When it's closed source or a platform, all I can do is cross my fingers and hope that the company updates soon. Right? That summarizes it pretty well.
Even there, I don't believe that open source is exclusively to be developed by the people who benefit from the eventual product. I think that you make something open source as a commercial enterprise because it's going to create the environment that your business is going to exploit. And so really successful open source projects are ones that create a market or create an environment for exploitation. So Brian's sketch program there looks like an ideal candidate to be under the Apache license. I think they've made a great choice there. And cool. If they manage their community right, they'll get lots of people embedding it in other software and then coming to them for the engine. They are somewhat burdened by the fact that the standardization activity is happening in a rather old school standardization environment. It's all object management group. The other players in the market, the big players, are very old school and very unlikely to be thinking outside the box. In fact, they're probably only thinking inside big boxes that have got mainframes in them, most of them.
Wow.
So I do think there is scope to have software that isn't intended to be maintained by the end user. And I think this is a problem space that's still waiting for the disruptive innovator to come in and create the category commoditization tool that creates a new market that will absorb what is now BPM.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm glad you provided that good summary there, and actually a point that I hadn't even seen, but yeah, that's important. So let's talk about the upcoming guests, because we're almost out of time here, almost up against my heart out. So we got next week, we have Scan Code, which scans code, detect licenses, copyrights, package manifests, and so on. That should be pretty fun. Following that, my good friend Jim Brandt is coming on to represent the Perl Foundation, which is all things Perl. We're going to talk about Perl 5, Perl 6, the Perl conferences, how we got the name of the Perl conference back from O'Reilly, which is really nice, and a whole bunch of other things, like how the foundation works, all that sort of stuff. In fact, we'll run out of time easy on this because, hey, it's my area. You guys keep wanting more Perl stuff. I got the head dude, okay? There we go. No people writing me more about that. Following that, GitLab, which is a very common, essentially an open source GitHub, because GitHub is proprietary, but GitLab is sort of almost the same things, but you can host it yourself or you can use their hosted services and stuff, so that's really cool. Gitcoin follows that, which is an easy way to monetize or incentivize FLOSS work. So you can actually put on your on your GitHub page, you can actually have a donate to this project, and they can donate, I think they're using only Ethereum right now, because Bitcoin takes too many days to clear these days, and it's really expensive. It's like $12 a transaction now, which is crazy. Maybe not. Maybe it's down to $6 a transaction now, given the drop in money. SUSE is going to be on. That's a very old and popular Linux distro. Alan Clark's going to be coming on to talk about that. Just added to the schedule between the last time I was on and this time when I was on. Etsy Viper Builder, which is some sort of thing that builds things for iOS applications, and that's all I could understand from it. But it's an open source technology to be able to help you build free and paid apps in the iPhone store, so iOS store, I guess it is. And also just added to the schedule, I'm really sort of interested in how this is going to work out. So the library that's behind Game and what am I using here? This is ADMX and things like that. In other words, the library that allows a lot of open source applications to talk to all these proprietary protocols to things like what used to be AIM, that's gone now, but like Yahoo and IRC and things like that. So the library behind that is called Pigeon, and it's also known as Live Purple. Those may be two different things, but there they are, and they're used in game things like that. Anyway, the current owner of that project is going to come on and talk about that, and also probably talk about the loss of AIM, since that's been gone now for a couple months. So too bad, all gone. I had to move all my people over to other things now. Okay, that's all I have on the list for right now. The big spreadsheet that has all these things on it and more is linked to from our homepage for our show, twit.tv/floss. You can go there, see what I'm working on. If there's something that you want on the show that isn't on that list, please have the project leader or community coordinator email me. That should be fun. And I'll get them on as quickly as I can. I've got a bunch of open slots still at the end of March. No, end of April. So I'm opening up May pretty quick here. You can follow us on Floss Weekly at Floss. You can follow us on Google Plus at Floss Weekly, or also at Floss Weekly on Twitter. There's a live stream. We take a number of questions from there. It's always a number of questions, even though it was 0 this time. That's still a number. 0 is a number. Don't be discriminating. It's 0. Okay. We do that 9:30 a.m. Pacific time on Wednesdays at live.twit.tv. You can follow me at Randall L. Schwartz on Google Plus, and that tweets over to @Merlin, MERLYN. So I have a couple of messages from the home office here, so I'm going to read those immediately here. Did you know that the Twit Flash Briefing is now available in Canada, Australia, the United Kingdom, and India? It's been in the U.S. for a while, so now is the perfect time to go to your Alexa app settings and look under the Flash Briefing and look for Twit. And also, it's time for our yearly Twit survey. We want to hear from you so we can serve you better. Head over to twit.tv/survey and be heard. My next public appearance is going to be at the SoCal Linux Expo. I am a speaker there and also press, so I'm going to be wandering the hallways looking for people to get for Floss Weekly. Then I'm madly, in the last month, in the last 30 days before the show, I am madly writing my talk. It's going to be on Flutter and being able to use build applications using Dart on both iOS and Android. So I am looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to getting some help from the Flutter guys to finish off the talk. So hopefully I get a chance to review it with them before I have to present it. Anyway, that's all I got to plug. Simon, what do you have to plug?
Hi, Randall. It's good to meet you. So it is this year. There's a big birthday this year. It is the 35th anniversary of free software, and wow. In addition to that, last Saturday was the 20th birthday of open source. The Open Source Initiative has launched a new website called opensource.net, and I encourage you to go to opensource.net and check out the great history timeline we have there, and to make your own history timeline so we can see your history of open source. You'll also find on there a listing of all of the events that the Open Source Initiative will be presenting at. We launched the activities at FOSDEM last weekend in Brussels, and we have a sequence of events going on all around the world. So Floss Asia is on at the moment, and we have a representative there. We had a representative in Israel just recently at their celebration event on Monday. So take a look at opensource.net and join in with us in this 20th birthday celebration of open source. As for me, I'm going to be speaking at a load of those things. If you go look at my website, meshedinsights.com, you'll find the keynote that I gave at FOSDEM on Saturday morning is up there, slides and video, so you can take a look at that. And another presentation I gave there about FAQs and the history of OpenJDK, that's open source Java, is also up there. The other big thing I want to tell people about is the conference that my nonprofit Public Software is helping to enable in the UK in August. August 18th and 19th, we have OGCamp. That's OGGCAMP. And if you go to ogcamp.org, you'll find that you can buy tickets. And you really ought to buy your tickets early because, first of all, they will sell out. And secondly, we need the money because we're going to spend it in putting on the conference. Those are three websites I want to send people to: meshedinsights.com, opensource.net, and ogcamp.org.
Now, OGCamp sounds familiar. Is that the thing that Dan Lynch used to talk about back when he was on the show more often?
Absolutely. So Dan Lynch was one of the founders of that. So was John O'Bacon, who was also one of your predecessors. And right. That's the UK conference that they put on for their podcast. And then it grew into a free culture event. And there's going to be all sorts of geeky stuff there. There's going to be open source. There's going to be podcasts of various flavors. I hope that I can record a segment of Floss Weekly that we can then broadcast one Wednesday when you run out of guests. So I'm going to have a really good try at doing that. And the place that we're hosting the conference in Sheffield in the UK is also the home base for a very big Raspberry Pi vendor who I hope will be there with their toys. So it's open hardware, open source, open podcasts, and probably quite a few open beer barrels.
Yes. And Simon, once again, I want to thank you for your particular insight for today's guest and for taking the hosting position last week and just generally being available. I'm going to give you a few weeks break, so don't worry. I won't be, if you say no to the next 3 or 4 weeks, I completely will understand. So that's not a problem.
Next week, look right up my street as well. I was just getting ready to do my research for that one.
Oh, well, if you want. We don't have a co-host yet. And now you guys behind this, a little bit of insight behind the scenes. I actually only start asking about the co-host like 5 or 6 days ahead of the show. So that's sometimes why I feel like I'm scrambling, but I'm scrambling. That's how it works. All right. Well, Simon, whether you're not, you're on the show next week. It was good to have you on again. And thank you very much.
It's my great pleasure. I look forward to being back on at some random point in the future.
Awesome. And we'll see you all again next week on Floss Weekly.